Yes, welcome to Clackamas County's Planning Commission on August 9th, 2021. May we have a roll call, please, Darcy?
Commissioner Lopes,
Present.
Commissioner Murphy,
Present.
Commissioner Pack,
Present.
Commissioner Pasco,
Present.
Commissioner Peterson, Commissioner Schroedel,
Present.
Present.
and Commissioner Stevens is absent tonight, and Commissioner Moss is absent as well.
Okay, so tonight we do have a quasi judicial hearing. Prior to that, I'm going to open it up for public comment. If we have any public comment from the audience that is not related to this hearing, please raise your hand and Darcy will go ahead and identify you. When she calls on you, please identify yourself and where you are located. Okay, thank you, Darcy.
I do not see any hands raised, but we have 2 call-in listeners. If you would like to say something, use the *9 on your phone. Oh, I do have 1 hand raised. So the phone number is ending in 3942. Hello?
Hello, this is Robert Sweeney with Environmental Management Systems. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney, are you here for the Murphy hearing?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, go ahead, Chair.
So I'm having a little trouble with the computer. So my company is the environmental company that did work for Mrs. Murphy. And go ahead.
Excuse me, Robert. Is this related to the hearing tonight?
Yes, this is for Melba Murphy. Is
Okay.
that correct?
Yes, Robert, this will be, you will have a time to testify during the hearing. Right now is for public testimony not related to the hearing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Darcy, we have anyone else? Any other hands? Okay.
No, there are no more hands.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open. Public hearing is now open for consideration of file Z0079-21 CP and Z0080-21-ZAP applications by Melva Murphy for the comprehensive plan map amendment to change the land use plan designation of the property to urban low density residential with a corresponding zone change of the subject property from timber to future urban acre FU10 to to facilitate future development of single family resident on vacant property. The subject property is 8.9 acres in size and located within the Portland Metro urban growth boundary in Damascus area on Southeast Borgs Road. Assisting us in the hearing today are several members of the county staff, Planning Director Jennifer Hughes, Principal Planner Martha Fritzy, Senior Planner Melissa Ahrens, Administrative Specialist 2 Darcy Renhart. The public hearing is being conducted virtually using the Zoom platform. Panelists for today's hearing, which includes members of the Planning Commission and county staff, both have an audio and video capability. The applicant will be added to the panelists during their presentation. If a panelist is participating with audio but not video, members of the audience will not see the panelist's name on the screen, but will be able to hear them when they speak. Audience members who have joined the meeting will have their mics muted unless they wish to testify, in which case they will be called upon to do so by the county staff moderator. Audience members' video will not be turned on at any time. Today's hearing is being recorded as required by law. The county will make every effort to post this recording on the county website as soon as possible. The Planning Commission is charged with making a recommendation on the application to the Board of County Commissioners. The record for this hearing will be forwarded to the board, which will make the final decision on this matter. The board will conduct another hearing in this application on September 15th, 2021 at 9:30 a.m. The hearing will be de novo, meaning that the hearing will be started anew and additional testimony may be offered. Tonight's hearing will not go beyond 10 p.m. If not concluded, it will be continued to a date and time certain. The hearing may be continued for other reasons as well. If announcement of an additional hearing date and time made tonight, it will be the only notice given of that additional hearing. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. Planning and zoning staff report. Entry into the record of any additional correspondence received, technical information from other government agencies, testimony of the applicant or representative, maximum length 60 minutes. Testimony by representative or of recognized community planning organizations or hamlets, maximum length 10 minutes per CPO or hamlet. Testimony by proponents of the application, maximum length 3 minutes per speaker or more if determined by the chair. Testimony by opponents of the application, maximum length 3 minutes per speaker or more as determined by the chair. Testimony by persons who are neutral on the application, maximum length 3 minutes per speaker or more as determined by the chair. Applicant rebuttal, which is limited to arguments addressing the evidence already in the record, maximum length 30 minutes. Planning and zoning division staff, rebuttal, which is limited to addressing evidence already in the record, closing the public hearing, planning commission discussion and action. There is a designated time the hearing when it will be open for testimony. The chair will make it clear when this is. If you want to provide testimony, you will utilize a raise hand feature in Zoom. Attendees on PC and iPad, you will have a raise hand button on the Zoom bar, top or bottom, depending on your device. Attendees by telephone use a *9 to activate the raise hand feature. When the moderator switches you over to provide testimony, your screen will look different for a moment. Primarily, you will see participants' cameras, not just the one who is speaking. Staff will call upon you when it is time for you to provide your testimony. For the record, please state your name and where you are from or who you're representing when you begin. Once you have provided your testimony, your mic will be muted and your screen will be returned to normal. Now is the time set for the public hearing related to previously identified comprehensive plan amendment and zone change applications. This is a quasi-judicial land use hearing, which means two important things for those participating in this hearing. First of all, the criteria that the Planning Commission can use in reaching a recommendation are listed in the notice given for the public hearing and will be identified when the oral staff report is presented. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward this criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan, zoning and development ordinance, or other land use regulation that the person testifying believes to apply to this decision. Accordingly, anyone testifying is asked to please direct your testimony to a relevant approval criterion. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties of an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Failure to the applicant to raise constitutional other relating issues to propose conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the county to respond to the issue precludes an action for damage in circuit court. Once final, the county's decision may be appealed to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. Disclosure. At this time, I will ask members of the Planning Commission to disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest. Please indicate the nature and extent of the ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, and indicate whether you intend to participate in or abstain from this hearing. Okay. If anyone wishes to challenge the impartiality of any commissioner, please clearly indicate your intention to do so in writing or oral testimony that you may provide. Staff report. The Planning and Zoning Division staff will now present the staff report. Hey, Melissa.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, bear with me while I share screen for the PowerPoint presentation here. Okay, can everybody see that? Yeah, okay. So today we are having a hearing considering land use application Z0079-21-CP for comprehensive plan amendment and a zone change Z0080-21-ZAP. The applicant is proposing to change the comprehensive plan designation for the property from forest to an urban low-density residential land use designation with a future urban land use classification and a corresponding zone change from timber TBR to future urban 10-acre FU10 zone to facilitate future single-family residential development. An alternate zoning of R30 was also proposed in the application, which would also require a low-density residential designation, but with an immediate urban land use classification instead of future urban. The application was submitted on February 23rd, 2021, and deemed incomplete on March 23rd, 2021. The applicant submitted an incomplete response on May 26, 2021, and the application was deemed complete that day. The submitted application is included as attachment A to the staff recommendation. Notice was sent out for a Planning Commission meeting and Board of County Commissioners hearing on July 1st, 2021. No formal comments were received. We have received a lot of questions from neighboring property owners. Does this apply to my property? What do these applications mean for me? No formal comment, though, has been submitted. Staff have been coordinating with relevant agencies throughout the process. However, no formal comments have been received either. The subject property is located within the Portland Metropolitan Urban Growth Boundary and in the boundaries of the former city of Damascus. The subject property is approximately 7.89 acres and is currently undeveloped except for an existing barn structure. In 2002, Metro Ordinance 02969B brought the entire Damascus area into the urban growth boundary. The ordinance changed and added to Metro's growth management policies in the form of amendments and additions to the regional framework plan 2040 Growth Concept Map, and the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, the UGMFP. Although the county had initiated concept planning efforts following the 2002 UGB expansion, when the city of Damascus was established, those county planning efforts stopped, and no other concept planning that would meet the requirements of the UGB ordinance or the UGMFP has occurred. Ordinance 02969B added the subject property into Metro's 2040 Growth Concept Map as an inner neighborhood designation. The neighborhoods of the 2040 Growth Concept and the specific Damascus UGB expansion area were intended to be planned and developed in conjunction with the regional and town centers of the Damascus urban area. As such, Ordinance 02969B included interim protections restricting comprehensive plan amendments and zone changes until concept planning could be completed to effectuate the intended area-wide urban planning. Specifically, the Metro Functional Plan Interim Protection Measures, Section 3.07.110 of the Metro Code, prohibit the county from approving any land use regulation or zoning map amendment to the subject property that would allow higher residential density than allowed by acknowledged provisions in effect prior to the adoption of the UGB amendment. And I'll go into more detail in that further along in the presentation. For a comprehensive plan amendment, the legal standard of review consists of statewide planning goals and applicable OARs, Metro ordinances in this case, and the county's comprehensive plan. For a zone change, the legal standard of review is Section 1202 of the county zoning and development ordinance. Based on review and analysis of the evidence on record and the applicable respective legal standards of review for each application, staff finds that the proposed comprehensive plan amendment is inconsistent with statewide planning goals and Metro ordinances, as well as with comprehensive plan policies and zone change requirements in the county's ZDO as specified above. As previously explained, the Metro UGMFP interim protection measures prohibit the county from approving any land use regulation or zoning map amendment to the subject property that would allow higher residential density than allowed by acknowledged provisions in effect prior to the adoption of the UGB amendment. The interim protection measures are in the next slide and included in Exhibit 4 of Attachment B to the staff recommendation. The property is currently zoned TBR timber, a natural resource zoning district, which does not allow residences as a primary permitted use. Inherently, the proposed FU10 or R30 zone would allow for higher residential density. To address this issue and the interim protection restrictions, the applicant asserts on page 7 of the submitted narrative as part of the application that prior to the adoption of the subject site to the UGB in 2002, the property was capable of a template test approval, which would allow one single family residence. Staff would like to clarify that there's no evidence of a template test approval ever having been submitted for or approved with the county for the subject property. Additionally, the application materials provide no evidence that would suggest that prior to 2002, the property would have met all the criteria for a forest template test. Staff do not have evidence to reach a conclusion that the property would have qualified for development of a single family residence prior to the expansion of the UGB in 2002. Without a template test approval for a TBR zone property, no residential development would have been authorized by the county ZDO. So the residential density allowed on the property would have been 0 before the UGB expansion. As such, the proposed comprehensive plan amendment and zone change to allow for higher residential density than the current TBR zoning district would not be consistent with Metro Code Interim Protection Measure 3.07.1110A, Exhibit L, and Exhibit M of Metro Ordinance 02969B. Planning staff have been coordinating with Metro staff in advance of this staff recommendation and have received informal feedback that a property-specific concept plan could potentially be used to satisfy the Title 11 planning requirements in Metro's Ordinance 02969B, which would also remove the interim protection measures described previously. That said, planning staff defer to Metro to formally allow for this process in lieu of the Title 11 planning requirements in the ordinance. The applicant was informed in the pre-application and completeness determination process that Metro had indicated that a concept plan may be a potential pathway. However, they did not submit a site-specific concept plan for the proposed development. Any concept plan for the site would need to comply with Metro Ordinance 02969B requirements, Metro's UGMFP Title 11 planning requirements, and the Regional Framework 2040 Growth Concept requirements. As such, considering the evidence on record for the subject applications, staff finds that the subject comprehensive plan amendment and zone change is not consistent with the applicable requirements of Metro Ordinance 02969B and associated sections of the UGMFP. Many statewide planning goals applicable to the subject proposal mirror urban planning requirements included in Metro's ordinances. As follows, the lack of concept planning for the subject urban property and larger Damascus area is the main reason that the proposal is also inconsistent with the county's comprehensive plan and statewide planning goals. Specifically, staff found that the proposed comprehensive plan amendment is inconsistent with statewide planning goals 2, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12, and 14. While the subject comprehensive plan amendment and zone change is proposed for development of a single-family residence that would be cited to avoid impacts to goal 5, 6, and 7 resources on site per the application that was submitted, planning staff have to look to the requirements for statewide planning goal 5, 6, and 7, consistency in Metro's Ordinance 02969B that would apply to a comprehensive plan amendment for the property and not just site development. Specifically, condition 1.G of Exhibit M requires compliance with the provisions of Metro's Functional Plan Title III and Title 11 when an amendment to the county's comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance is proposed to implement the UGB. The subject application has not demonstrated compliance with applicable sections of Title III or Title 11 of Metro's Urban Growth Management Functional Plan that would be applicable for a comprehensive plan amendment proposed to implement the UGB. All of the following statewide planning goals have requirements that relate back to concept planning for urban areas that would be applicable to the subject property. The specific findings for each of these statewide planning goals starts on page 8 of the staff recommendation. As the county's comprehensive plan implements and often mirrors statewide planning goals, the proposed comprehensive plan amendment and zone change was found inconsistent for many of the reasons already described previously. Chapters 5, 7, and 11 of the comprehensive plan require that land use planning, transportation planning, and public facilities and services planning are completed for the Damascus area consistent with the procedures laid out in Chapter 11 of the comprehensive plan. Staff will provide additional detail regarding Chapter 4 on the next slide. To provide a bit more detail about the proposed comprehensive plan designation change and zone change, staff prepared the table above, which shows the current and proposed land use designations and zoning district as they relate to each other. In summary, in order to move out of the property's current classification of future urban study area and into a future urban area classification, which would allow for the low density residential land use designation, the subject property would need to meet the requirements of Comprehensive Plan Policy 4D, which requires a concept planning process consistent with Chapter 11 of the Comprehensive Plan. Because the subject comprehensive plan amendment and zone change cannot be found consistent with the requirements of Policy 4D, the property could not be moved into the future urban study area classification. Additionally, the property's classification could not be moved to immediate urban for a R30 zoning designation until public services and facilities were actually available to the property. As such, the proposed comprehensive plan amendment and zone change is inconsistent with the requirements for future urban and immediate urban land use classification, as well as the corresponding FU10 and R30 zoning districts. As previously summarized, the proposed comprehensive plan and zone change is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan So it wouldn't meet the requirements of 1202.0 through A. And I'm sorry to specify, this is now the approval criteria that we look to for the zone change. So we're looking at section 1202 of the county zoning and development ordinance. As explained in 1202.03A, the proposed zone change, which would allow for one home, would not be consistent with applicable provisions of the comprehensive plan. However, if the proposed zone change was somehow found consistent with 1202.03A and specifically the requirements of Chapter 4 for future urban land use classification and corresponding land use designation of low density residential for the FU10 zone, the property could rely on the proposed septic system and well water for services. The alternate proposed zone change of R30 and required land use classification of immediate urban would require public services for the property and would not allow for the proposed private septic and well service uses. As such, the proposed FU10 zoning would be consistent with policy 1202.03B, but the alternate zoning of R30 would not be consistent with this policy. For policies 1202.03C and D, Clackamas County engineering staff have reviewed the submitted traffic impact analysis memo and concur with the conclusions in the application submittal that there would be no significant impact on the transportation system or its safety from the proposed single-family dwelling due to the minimal level of traffic increases anticipated from the comprehensive plan and zone change. So the proposed zone change could be found consistent with 1202.03C and D. The staff report goes into more detail about the transportation consistency issues with statewide planning goal and comprehensive plan chapter that are separate from this consistency analysis for the zone change. We're simply just looking at is the system adequate for the proposed single family residence and comp plan designation and zone change. That concludes staff's presentation. And I am available for questions if anybody wants to go more into detail or if I can help in any way. Let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good. Any questions from our commissioners? Very good job, Melissa.
I have
Thank
a
you.
question, Murph.
Okay.
Melissa, what is involved with concept planning? That seems to me to be a little ambiguous type of term. Concept planning involves what activities and what does the applicant have to do for concept planning?
That's a really good question. That's something I was curious about as I started working on the staff recommendation. It's addressed in multiple different places. I think maybe a good place to start is the Metro Ordinance 02969B that brought that Damascus area into the urban growth boundary in the first place. When they were doing that, they put certain conditions on there specific to that region because there were lots of different sections that were brought into the UGB at that point. So there were Damascus area concept planning requirements that the ordinance called out in terms of natural resources, public services, planning to accommodate kind of the commercial centers, employment areas, things like that. So there's specifics about what concept planning would need to include it there. The urban growth management functional plan that Metro oversees and keeps updated and has evolved past that ordinance. It also includes Title 11 concept planning requirements. So there are specifics in there as well. And then Clackamas County's comprehensive plan also has Chapter 11, which has its own concept planning type requirements.
So when I'm thinking of concept, I'm thinking of something that you're looking at out in the future for how this is going to develop. And so in that regard, the concept, has to start somewhere, and that could start with a single dwelling, and then be looked forward into the future for other development within it as a part of a concept of how this is going to look. And if we apply a lot of ideas about what is going to happen, has to happen now, then we lose that beginning point and in the idea of a concept developing. I'm, that's just my thoughts on this.
Understand. We talked to Metro about that. Martha and Jennifer probably want to weigh in. My 2 cents just on that whole issue is that the intent of the urban growth boundary is to plan these areas in a larger context so that they're able to function with residential areas, communities, public services, that it all is integrated and that it's a larger kind of urban plan that fits in and works well together. It's not separated out and developed slowly, which can have certain issues with the way that public facilities and traffic, transportation, all of that kind of fits together. So there are planning concerns with piecemeal development, and I will maybe let Martha and Jennifer jump in too if they want to.
Thank you.
I think that was a great answer, Melissa. And I think that's the issue with this concept planning. Do you need to concept plan? Damascus was, I don't know, 12,000 acres or something when it was brought into the UGB. Do we need to do a concept plan for 12,000 acres for it to be effective? No, I don't think so. But the idea of having a concept plan 1 lot at a time for Damascus, I think would be a problem. And so the question becomes, where's the line between 12,000 acres all at once in 1 lot? And I think the other concern is we could say from a policy perspective, maybe 1 lot isn't a big deal, but this won't be the only one of these that you see. And while we do need to evaluate it on its merits, this application on its merits, when we're looking to interpret really what are, somewhat discretionary standards for comprehensive plan amendments and zone changes, we do need to think about that larger policy context of the next one and the next one and the next one that we would need to treat fairly if the circumstances were similar. And so I think that's all playing out, in staff's mind in terms of how we deal with what may seem like a very simple request for 1 house, but really opens up some bigger technical and policy related questions in the world of planning, which is why you're all here, I think.
I have a quick question. Maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not, but when this area was brought into the urban growth boundary, Damascus was an incorporated community, right? Which brought with it all kinds of concepts around potential urban growth, a potential land use plan, tax dollars and future development. And does the fact that Damascus no longer incorporated change the analysis of that to some degree in terms of the future of this area and this property in particular? Does that make any sense? Because this is, even from a Damascus perspective, this property is, pretty, far removed from the traditional city centers, and there's unlikely to be more development brought to this particular area in the near future, even less so now that Damascus is no longer incorporated. Does that make any sense?
Do you want me to take a stab at this one?
Yeah.
So you are making sense. When this area was originally brought into the urban growth boundary, it was not yet an incorporated city. And the county did start some planning efforts, some high level, more holistic community planning efforts. When the city incorporated, they then took over the responsibility of planning this area and were never successful in creating in getting a plan adopted for a number of reasons. The fact of the matter, though, is we had to follow the same rules that they have to follow inside the urban growth boundary. And so now that they are no longer a city, those same rules are still there. It's just different jurisdictions.
Yeah. So nothing has actually changed as a result of or as a result of the disincorporation?
No, just a lot of time has passed and the
right.
zoning hasn't changed in this area yet, in
Right.
a lot of this area.
Right.
So.
Thank you.
May I ask a question? Since it's within an urban growth boundary, and if this was approved, if there was development, there would have to be sidewalks put in, if I'm not mistaken. They would have to file for a FILO if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, so there would have to be stormwater control, there'd have to be curbs, there would have to be sidewalk for pedestrian travel. Of course, it would only be that one particular lot, but if I remember right, in our past commission meetings, that's a requirement. Am I right?
So they would be taking access through an easement from the property directly abutting Southeast Borges Road. So they're not on a road. They would be, the property would be accessed through a private road.
Okay, so there would not be a frontage zone change on that property. The
Not,
property
no.
that's fronting. Okay, got it. Thank you.
I had my hand up.
Oh.
I apologize for being late. I was working away out in the yard and all of a sudden realized I was missed the meeting. So my apologies. I have and maybe you've answered some of these questions, but I guess two things that come to mind. One, okay, nothing's happened since the Damascus, stopped being or tried to be a city. Are there any plans in the near future to kind of get this resolved so that we don't have this situation where these various landowners would like to go ahead and develop their property, but because we haven't adopted a new comprehensive plan for Damascus, that's kind of in simple terms a reason why no one can develop. And so it seems to me, in fairness to the owner, there ought to be some effort to try to get this other issue resolved so these landowners aren't kind of hamstringed a little bit because nothing's moving on a new plan. So is there any momentum, or is it just kind of in la la land for now?
So that is an excellent question. Unfortunately, there's no easy answer for it. There have been efforts, and Martha's probably the best person to tell us the sort of somewhat exact boundaries of this, but the area that is closest to the current city limits of Happy Valley. Well, first of all, Happy Valley has annexed some areas that were previously Damascus. They have also embarked upon a concept planning process for, I think about, is it 3,000 acres, Martha? Is that right? I feel like it's about 3,000 acres, but
Maybe, I think it's a little bit less, maybe 2,500.
Again, like Carver and kind of, that sort of in, north from there on the eastern edge of the city. That has not been adopted yet, but they got quite a ways through that planning process. And I believe they suspended it due to COVID and the fact that they wanted to have a more traditional style of public hearings and outreach for that type of a plan. And so they delayed it first. And I haven't heard any updates. So part of it is under consideration, but anything farther than that, now you're starting to be further out in the discussion. The city has some interest in adding to their city of Happy Valley, adding to their urban growth management area. I believe some area that's even further east than that concept plan they've been working on. Martha, how far out?
Roughly 222nd. Is that a major north-south arterial? So yes, and Happy Valley is taking care of the planning for the western portion of the former city of Damascus. At least that's their intent. And I think that what they are thinking is, a lot. Urban development needs urban services. And right now, the urban services are on the western boundary of Damascus. Got as far over as about 172nd with sewer so far, and maybe marching eastward. And that's kind of the logical progression for building out the infrastructure to support urban development. And that's why it's moving that direction right now. But, you know, putting in urban infrastructure and the sewer and the water and the roads is expensive and it takes time. And so that's why I believe Happy Valley is taking this in smaller chunks to plan for a couple thousand acres at a time, get that area going, get development going, get services out there, and then it will move to an area that they're interested a little bit farther east that they're planning right now. What that doesn't do is get all the way even to where this property is, I don't believe, because this is east of 222nd, isn't it?
It's not just east, it's significantly removed from a lot of the, I mean, this is, for all intents and purposes, still a fairly rural property in Damascus area, right? It's significant, you know, and I guess that's my question is, you know, the landowner acquired this property knowing it was zoned TBR, right?
Yes, I believe so,
Yeah.
Melissa.
It
No,
was,
I thought the property was acquired prior to some of these changes included in incorporating it into the urban growth boundary. Seems like it was 1997. Was that, am I correct with that date?
we have some detail in the staff recommendation on that. It's my understanding from the way that the deed history reads that it was acquired in the 70s by a man, and his wife, then Melva Murphy, became the owner through deed. So she didn't purchase it per se. She was added to title.
No, that was 1979. I believe now you're correct.
Just to carry to the policy arguments, I mean, this is not the only TBR zone designation in Damascus, and it seems to be a slippery slope of opening up zoning throughout the entire community without a clear plan.
I agree with you, Brian. This could have major impact on other pieces of property, you know, not only located there, but other places by setting a precedent for what we do here.
And not to carry deliberation on any further, but I guess, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but this property doesn't seem to be located next to any real urban facility. And so I'm struggling to understand if I'm missing something around some argument for urgent, development that might occur here that's different from elsewhere, from similar properties in the area. I'm just not seeing that, unless I'm missing something.
I mean, no, I don't think there's any, I don't think there's anything unique about this in terms of the availability of urban services. It is relatively remote in the context of, Damascus.
Right, okay.
And yes, that's accurate.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Anyone else? Well, it has very strong value in its location for habitat conservation area and water quality. It does play a very important role for Rock Creek and that area through there. So if you look at it through an aerial map, it has tremendous value for the way it stands right now as timber. And Goal 5 does protect that. And I think that's pretty plain.
I think the main point here, Murph, is looking at what the staff has put together here. There's 19 statewide land use goals. And according to what the staff has come up with, this piece of property or this request for a zoning change does not meet eight of those 19. And that's a significant number that it doesn't meet 8. Now, whether those 8 are really valid for this particular portion of property. Well, the fact that it's 8 is significant to me.
Yes, Michael,
Chair, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. We really do need to move to the applicant's presentation and testimony. You're straying into deliberation, and we need to really wait until you've heard everything first.
okay. Are there any questions for staff from the commission, or should we move on? Okay. Have we received any correspondence on the matter other than those items included in the meeting packets?
No, not to my knowledge.
Are there any government agencies here to provide technical information related to this application? Nope. The applicant may now present the proposal. You have a maximum of 60 minutes.
So I do see that Ms. Murphy is here, and then I believe her, yes, consultant.
Okay.
So I've moved Miss Murphy and Mr. Sweeney over so they can both talk if they will unmute.
Okay.
Okay, I'm Melva Murphy, and then Bob Sweeney, I guess, is still on the phone. So I can start out by giving you the history. My husband has owned the property since 1997 or 79. And 3 years ago, he got really sick. And so I decided we needed a house where I could take care of him safely because he can't walk and has trouble thinking. And anyway, so I wanted to build a single-story house with no steps and a shower big enough to take care of him. I'm 78 years old and my husband's 88. And in June of 2019, I talked to a contractor who said he would build us a house on the property and he'd get all the permits, et cetera, et cetera. So in July, he hired an excavator who made the house site and put in a road, an access road from Borges through the property in front. And I paid over $100,000 in charges that they had. And so then I went to Clackamas County Planning Departments numerous times. And I was told by one of the planners that I could get a forest dwelling permit to build on the property. So I spent weeks getting a template test by doing everything they told me to do and finding all the names and addresses and whatever. But, and I think I talked to Ben Blessing and Nicole Cross numerous times. And then after many months or weeks and months, they said a forest dwelling permit was not an option. So all my time and the money for the permits, the money was actually refunded for the last permit that I got, but and they said, no, you can't, we can't do it. And so that was probably late or October, November, I don't know when it was. But in September 2019, I received a violation notice from the Habitat Conservation Area or from Clackamas County that we took out 4 or 5 trees. That was in the Habitat Conservation Area, which my husband had no clue that we even had a Habitat Conservation Area on the property. He knew it was timber, but he didn't know that it was protected or whatever. And I showed the letter to my contractor about the violation, and the contractor resigned because apparently he didn't get the permits like he was supposed to have. And so then I went to the county again to get an understanding of what the violation really meant. They wouldn't give me any information other than your only option is to go to a mediation company. So then I went, he gave me the names of EMS and a couple other companies. And I called EMS and they started working on the project in October of 2019. So I've paid them over the last 2 years about $50,000. And the Robert at EMS talked to the planning commissioners at the county, and I don't know who he talked to. But he says, the planning commission said, well, if you change the zoning, then maybe you can build properly. And so that's why I guess we're here today, but I had no clue that, I mean, I didn't want to change the zoning. I just wanted to put a house on the property. And then they said, well, if we put the house where the barn was located, that it would be a better place for the house and it would be passed more easily. So we demolished the barn last year. And we don't have a barn and we can't build a house. But I did hire a company to come in and replace the 4 or 5 trees because they cleared out 12,000 square feet of area to take out those, to put in the house side and the 4 or 5 trees and some blackberries and stuff. So now I'm paying a company to come out in September or October. They're going to put in 123 trees and 610 shrubs. And that's going to cost about $10,000. And last year I paid out $20,000 to an attorney and a surveyor. And so it's just almost up to $200,000 that I put into the property, and I'm still at 0.0. So all I wanted to do is start out with the house on the timber, because there's a whole acre there that could have a house that's not timber, but we just didn't realize that we had creeks or valleys or whatever that, so the rest of the property isn't usable. It's just always been there. And my husband's taken care of the property very well for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So that's where we're at. And Bob Sweeney knows all the really probably important things.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Murphy. Anything else?
Nope, I just want to build a house so that I can keep my husband safe and.
Can I just ask a question of how has the property been used since you all acquired the deed in 76 or whatever it was? Is that what is, have you guys been living adjacent to the property? How has the land been used until now?
My husband and his first wife lived in the house on Borges Road. And it's like there's 2.5 acres on that parcel.
And that parcel was sold and this remains, is that the issue?
Yeah, because our income is quite low. So we sold the house so that we'd have enough money to buy a new house to navigate, because he needs a walker or wheelchair at all times. And so it's just too difficult. So, but he's taken care of the whole 10 acres for the last 40 years. And it's in very good shape until we cut those 4 or 5 trees down. But I didn't do it, the contractor did it. So I didn't know what he was really doing. I just thought he was knowing what he should do. And
there's been no development on the property except for the barn, which is now demolished. Is that accurate?
right.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions for Mrs. Murphy?
I do. Ms. Murphy, have you harvested any of the timber off of the property to any degree? Or has it just been sitting there growing for the last 42 years?
It's all been growing until they cut those 5 trees. And then we harvested those trees. Plus we had to cut a few more that were, oh, I don't know what, they had tops that they were like 6-8 feet in diameter and had 2 things. Anyway, they were really dangerous. So we took out a few, like 3 or 4 more trees, and then they had enough to take them to the mill last year. So we did harvest.
So, but your original intent when you purchased the property was not necessarily to use it as a income-making forestry operation. Is that correct?
No, we just wanted a house so that we could live. We were always going to leave the trees. And through the years, my husband had just planted lots of rhododendrons and such around the property. And so it was always kind of a very nice place with all the trees in the back. And there's enough space in front of the trees to have a house.
So sorry, I'm gonna ask one more question, and this actually might be a question more appropriate for staff, but correct me if I'm wrong. So under TBR, a property owner can't have a single family dwelling on a TBR zone property, right? Is the issue here location or some other restriction? Can you help me out with that?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in.
Thanks,
So
Melissa.
the timber zone is a resource zone and natural resource zoning district, and residences are not a primary permitted use. There are pathways through land use approval. The most common one is the template test, which kind of looks at a larger area to see what the pattern of development is, if the property can qualify, but it needs to be outside the UGB. So they were not able to get a template test approval
Okay.
because of that reason. There
I
are
thought
other.
Yeah, I thought we got a template place approval. They just said that it wasn't okay, or for some reason the county sent back the permit check saying that we couldn't do it because the template thing was all submitted. But
Yeah, it sounds like what happened is you submitted we do a GIS mapping analysis as a courtesy to see if the property would qualify for the template test, just because it's so complicated what state law requires that for applicants, we do a mapping. It's separate from the actual application. That result of that mapping analysis was that the property wouldn't meet the requirements because of the inclusion in the UGB. I don't have any record or system of an application ever being submitted, but if you submitted one and it was you're refunded, maybe because of the conclusion of that mapping analysis, it wouldn't show up in the system anymore either. So potentially that's what happened.
So suffice to say, but for the fact that it's considered inside the UGB by Metro, otherwise it would be very possible to have a single family dwelling on a county-owned, on a piece of property in the county that's zoned TBR. It's the urban growth boundary line that's the problem here, correct?
We don't have information showing that it would get a template test approval. So
Okay.
we don't know if it would qualify or not, and the
Right.
application did not include that information
Okay.
besides the UGB issue.
Okay.
Nicole Cross was the one that I have like numerous emails from, and she helped me through everything. And then after several months, she just sent me a note and said, sorry, we can't go ahead and go any further on it. So is Nicole Cross still available to talk to her and find out what happened?
So actually, she is not. She left the county recently, but I think what Melissa has indicated, that is likely the case. I mean, if there's been any research done in terms of whether it would qualify for a template if it were outside the urban growth boundary, we haven't found that. So if Nicole did send you something, emails or whatnot, we'd certainly be happy to look at that. to get to your question, Commissioner Pasco, because it just feels so funny to say, well, if you were outside the UGB, you
Right.
can do a template test, and if you're inside the UGB, you can't have a template test. It's not quite that simple. I mean, it's true in this case, it creates this bizarre sort of,
Right.
circular thing. She can't win for losing, right? But it's the reason, really what the issue is that when you do a template test, you're looking for a certain level of development near that site. So a certain
Right.
number of parcels, certain number of houses.
Right.
What the state rule says is, in counting up the ones that justify an additional dwelling, you can't include ones that are inside the urban growth boundary. So it's really not necessarily about this site. It's about what the state was trying to
Sure.
prevent is you have a forest lot on the fringe of, say, the city of Sandy
Right.
that qualifies. That's the issue. But this Damascus thing, nobody ever,
Right.
thought, right?
Right.
I had a quick question for staff. Has the zoning on this property over the last 40 years changed, or has it been stable?
So it changed, and I think it's in the staff recommendation in 1994, I want to say, to the current, 7/20/1994, it was zoned timber or TBR. I believe before that it was TT20, which is kind of a older forest type zoning that Martha or Jennifer might know more about than I do.
So the reality is that the type of zoning really didn't change. It was probably a more of a designate, the zoning definitions changed, and this property was matched to the new standard.
Correct. The state overhauled all of the EFU and forest zoning in the early 1990s, 1993, and then administrative rules the year after. And so jurisdictions had to change our regulations in accordance. And so it was still forest, but the rules for getting a dwelling and the minimum lot sizes changed at the state level in the early 90s.
My own property went from a GTD to a TBR, which is about the same, but a TT20, which is transitional timber 20, I think is more, it allows a house more than timber or GTD. So in other words, that zoning went kind of to a stricter code? Is that what happened?
I think it's safe to say generally, yes. The lot sizes definitely did. So it went to an 80-acre minimum, almost without exception, for all farm and forest zones at the state level starting in 93, 94. Prior to that, like TT20 would allow a 20-acre minimum lot size. There were a whole lot more exceptions and all of that. So the lot sizes became more restrictive. In terms of dwelling approvals, sort of depended. There used to be these forest management plans you could do non-forest use permits. The standards for those weren't as stringent as they are today. But the flip side is there was no such thing as a template test. So for some folks, the template test has worked out pretty well in terms of qualifying for a dwelling. So I think it's probably a little more questionable whether it became more restrictive in terms of dwelling approvals, but it definitely did on lot sizes for people who had larger tracts.
I'm sorry, I just have one more question, and forgive me if I can't find it in the staff report, but what are the neighboring, are the neighboring properties also designated TBR, or do they have other zoning classifications?
Sure. A lot of them are TBR. I can share screen if that's helpful and show the kind of surrounding zoning if you want.
Please do.
Yeah,
I'm personally curious, yeah.
one moment. Bear with me.
I mean, just looking at the aerial maps, this is a very forested area.
My computer is going slow. Hang on.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, just one second.
Well, while she's bringing up, and the purpose of the timber zoning was to preserve timber or that particular aspect of our environment?
It's actually not so much environmental preservation. I mean, goal 5, the things like the habitat conservation area and those types of things are really the environmental protections. Timber zoning is intended to preserve land for the forest economy. So it really is about growing, harvesting, and selling timber.
So can everyone see that?
Mhm.
So that brown line is the zoning district boundary. So you can see there's AGF, which is ag forest, kind of like an intermediary between EFU, exclusive farm use, and timber TBR. The TBR down to the left indicates that whole timber zone area, and then there's more timber zoning up above to the north.
So,
And there are no other homes in that TBR area that's adjacent to the blue area, right?
So there's a home directly above it on the property that used to be in common ownership with Melva Murphy and her husband. There's a home there that I'm aware of. Other than that, I don't know. I'd have to go property by property. I would say it's probably a mix of some older homes, residences that are maybe predate zoning. A lot of them, I can do an aerial view. A lot of them just look forested, so it's kind of hard to tell. So there's an aerial view.
And those are probably put in place prior to the current statewide planning goals?
I don't know that for sure. That would be a larger research quandary adventure. The statewide planning goals date back to early 70s, right? So I don't know. We'd have to go, lot by lot. And I mean, some of them, there may be some approved by a template test out there. I'm not sure.
I think what you would find is that there's a mix. There were a number of ways to approve dwellings even after the statewide planning goals, the various iterations of the zoning regulations over the years, and then prior to the UGB moving, and then even once the UGB moved, there are still ways you can qualify for a dwelling on farm and forest land inside the UGB. This issue is really very unique to the template test, and it's because of that issue of not being able to count any of the parcels around it because they're all inside an urban growth boundary. So you can't meet the template test because you need X number of parcels and you get 0 for this one. So it's really very unique to the template. The problem is that the other types of dwellings that you could theoretically qualify for in a forest zone, this parcel won't. I cannot see that it would meet any of the other 3 for various reasons associated with it. There's been no decision made to that effect, but I know one for sure it won't, and the other 2 it seems highly unlikely.
The unfortunate part is that the property had a dwelling on it until it was split, and that dwelling was sold, leaving them with the other property.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's probably exactly what this whole zoning designation was trying to prevent in the first place, was increased subdivision of this particular land and destroying the timber use of the property.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. I noticed AGF adjacent to it. If this property was in that zone, would she have the same issues?
She would.
Yeah.
So I thought that'd be simple. Just change it to AGF and then she's good to go. Not lucky, huh? Darn.
So if it's zone timber for harvesting and such, and we can't touch any of the trees because it's in the habitat protection or whatever. So what is the sense of having it in the timber zone?
Sherry, do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
So, Mrs. Murphy, I'm actually going to look into this a little bit for you because as you were testifying, I got a little concerned about that exact issue because there actually are protections for, I guess it's almost reverse protections, not protections for the stream, but protections for harvesters of timber if it's being done under a commercial harvest. And so I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it's really not relevant to the zone change application, but I think there is a question as to whether you are restricted from harvesting your trees for commercial purposes. You very well may not be. Now, having said that, the Oregon Department of Forestry does have buffer requirements from streams. So it isn't wide open, but it might be different than the county's habitat conservation area overlay. And so I'm happy to look into that a little bit, but we can't really resolve that tonight. But it did set a little question in the back of my mind when you were testifying.
Yeah, because the trees are like 100 years old, so they're huge. And so even the ones we cut because if they were so dangerous, there's no market for them hardly because they don't have the mills to do them.
Right.
They're too big. So.
So I have a question here for Melissa. All this conversation we just had addresses which of the non-complying statewide planning goals? 2, 5, 6, 7, which one?
So the most recent conversation we've been having is surrounding the current zoning, TBR, and the potential development given that zoning. So we haven't addressed any of the statewide planning goals. If you want, I'm happy to go into more detail about them and answer any specific questions. But really our conversation most recently was just restricted to zoning and potential on site right now.
Yeah, back to my earlier comment that there were 19 statewide planning goals, and according to your staff report, what's being asked for here does not meet 8 of those. And I think that's an important element that we need to address as to if there is any possibility of reaching any compromise on any of those 8 planning goals.
Certainly, I'd be happy to go through each one of them in more detail if that's helpful for everyone, or if there's particular ones you have questions about. I can kind of give a brief summary and you can ask questions as needed unless there's an...
I think a brief summary would work.
Sure.
Melissa, before you do that, so Chair, I think we still need to find out if Mrs. Murphy would like her consultant to speak. Mr. Sweeney's here. We're still really in applicant presentation and not in deliberation. And there is someone else in the audience, and I don't know if they're here to testify either for or against, but we really should complete the applicant's presentation.
Thank you, Jennifer. I was just going to that. Mr. Sweeney's been very patient. So, Mrs. Murphy, would you like Mr. Sweeney to speak?
Please, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sweeney, or could you go ahead? Hello, Mr. Sweeney? Robert?
Looks like his phone is on mute. Do you think that's the issue, Darcy?
Yes. There we go.
Mr. Sweeney, you should be able to speak now. I don't think we have a connection.
I don't see any obvious tech issue from our side that would be preventing him from speaking. I don't know.
We try to call in again.
Yeah, maybe disconnect and call back in. Now it's showing the phone on
He
mute.
just muted himself. Hello?
Hello? Mr. Sweeney? I don't think we have a connection. Is he also the phone number?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, Mr. Sweeney? Mrs. Murphy, I think Mr. Sweeney's having some technical problems.
And he said his computer didn't work, but he was on the phone earlier, but I don't know. I don't know how to, I just tried his home phone and it just went right to voicemail.
Well, from our end, it shows that he's connected.
Yes.
He's
We-
probably,
Do we want to ask for other testimony and see if he can join us a bit later?
Yes, why don't we?
So Mrs. Murphy, we're going to move you back to the audience for right now and see if there's additional testimony. And then if Mr. Sweeney is able to connect, we can certainly bring you back in again.
Are there any representatives of the community planning organizations or hamlets here to speak? Each organization will have 10 minutes to testify.
Don't see anyone. There's another phone number in the audience, and that's all.
Okay, does anyone wish to speak in favor of the application? Each person will have 3 minutes to testify. Please raise your hand if so.
Maybe just a reminder. So the phone number, it looks like there's a phone number ending in 6652. So if you are wanting to speak in any one of these categories, you would use *9 on your phone to raise your hand.
I'm showing Mr. Sweeney is connected but muted at this time. Something just changed with his name.
Yeah, he disconnected on his phone and he's still there by his computer, which is muted. So
Okay. Does anyone wish to speak in opposition to this application? Each person will have 3 minutes to testify. Raise your hand, please.
seeing none.
Okay. Does anyone wish to provide neutral testimony? Each person will have 3 minutes to testify. Raise your hand, please.
I don't see any. Do we have Mr. Sweeney?
Mr. Sweeney, are you present? I don't think so.
I'm getting some background noise from his computer.
So I guess one possibility, because it doesn't appear as far as I can tell, that the person with phone number ending in 6652 is listening but not interested in testifying. And so there's no one else except Mrs. Murphy and her consultant. So maybe we would take a break even for like 5 minutes or something and just see if he's able to resolve his connection issue. And then I think we would just need to move on, recognizing that the hearing at the board is de novo. So he's certainly able to testify at the board, even if he can't testify today. The other alternative would be if the Planning Commission felt strongly about it, you could certainly continue this hearing. The issue is that there's really not a date available before the board hearing on September 15th, unless you wanted to do something, unless you wanted to add an extra meeting to your calendar. So, but possibly we could take a break and then just see if he's able to call back in again and connect.
Commissioners, you'd like to take a break?
Yeah, I think a recess makes a lot of sense, and then we can evaluate when we return.
Okay.
Do we have a way of reaching out to him and connecting him with Darcy or someone to try and resolve some of these issues? Is there any way we can give Mrs. Murphy a contact number that maybe she can talk to him and connect?
I don't think he was on the application, was he, Melissa?
We know how to connect.
You're muted, Melissa.
Sorry, he's the president of the consultant company that is on the application. It's just a different staff member from that company that had her name on there.
So we probably have the company phone number, but that would be all.
Well,
We have it.
and Mrs.
Sorry.
Murphy knows how to contact him, correct? So
Sounds like it.
and we know how to contact her. So maybe we can find a way to, like, in the next 10 minutes, figure out whether we can get him on or not.
I have his email. I can email him directly.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So we want to give them 10 minutes?
I think that's fair. And then we'll figure out how to move forward.
Okay, so 8:06.
See y'all then.
Okay.
I have been emailing with Bob Sweeney. I can just read you what he said. He said he is available. He has been listening and has used the chat. And then he said, I asked if he wanted to give a presentation on behalf of Melva Murphy, or did he not have anything else to add? He says he has an email from Nikki Cross he wanted to discuss, and he has a solution he wants to suggest. I asked him if he wanted to do that now in the Zoom format or wait until the board meeting. He just responded and said, I have a suggestion for commission with a phone number. So I'm not really sure what that means. I've made it clear he'd have to do that now in the Zoom format. We couldn't call him from the Zoom meeting, I don't believe, unless I'm missing something.
Well,
Not that I'm aware of.
well, with that, does any of the commissioners have anything else to add?
I was, before this, I was going to say I was skeptical that Mr. Sweeney would have any additional information to share with us that he hasn't already shared with staff, that hasn't been conveyed to us through the staff report. But it sounds like he may have another idea, but we have no way of knowing what that is.
Exactly. And I think staff did a fantastic job with this presentation. Very difficult digging through this, and their presentation leads down a pretty tough decision.
I think that the most efficient way of resolving this for Mrs. Murphy would be for us to deliberate and make a recommendation with, as Jennifer suggested earlier, with the understanding that it's all de novo when it gets to the county commission. And if Mr. Sweeney has a brilliant idea that makes some sense, it can be resolved there. But I don't think we should delay this, because she's obviously been through quite a bit already. And the sooner that we can get a resolution on our side, I think that only helps.
I agree.
So Chair Murphy, Mrs. Murphy has her hand up again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's let her speak. Mrs. Murphy, go ahead.
Okay, I think he mentioned to me today that his thought was maybe present to you, can we build on the adjacent property and use and have a, like put a second residence on the first 2 acres and then use a septic system that would go onto the other property, maybe? I don't, probably not saying it exactly right, because he just mentioned that today. But I think what it's like, my grandson lives on the front part of the property. So I'm thinking, he just said maybe we can build a house there and just use a dual sewer system for the 2 properties.
Well, you know, that's not what this meeting, I think, was to conclude.
I know, this is just zoning, so I think that's completely out of the, I don't know.
Yes, I would think that what he was thinking, perhaps an accessory dwelling unit or something of that nature, but I don't know in that zoning if that would work. I mean, that we're not here to answer that.
Okay,
Yes,
that's good.
but no, we're trying to be as compassionate as possible.
Yeah, thank you.
We do have to answer the questions that are asked. So with that, Mrs. Murphy, if there isn't anything else, any questions from commissioners or staff for Mrs. Murphy?
I just wanted to say that I'm happy to talk offline, Mrs. Murphy, anytime you want about those questions.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one quick question. I'm curious, where are you living currently?
Where are we living currently?
Yes.
In above the garage in 600 square feet, which is hard to access for us, but
This is
and-
not adjacent property?
pardon? On my grandson's property.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm even more sympathetic to your challenge here. That's awful that you're in that situation right now.
Yeah, so it's just been a rough 2 years.
Yeah.
But it's been a rough 2 years for everybody, so
Yep. It has indeed. Thank you.
thank you very much.
Does any person wish to request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application? The applicant is allowed at least 7 days after the record is closed to all other parties to submit final written arguments in support of the application. Alternatively, the applicant may waive the 7-day period. Does the applicant choose to waive the additional 7 days?
So we would need to ask Mrs. Murphy that question. So sorry, Darcy, can you bring her over one more time?
Okay, I'm waving what?
Let me explain it a little bit. I'll try. This stuff gets so crazy complicated. So technically, you have a right to spend the next week thinking about final written arguments you might want to make to the Planning Commission. You have the choice. You can do that or you don't have to. If you want to do that, then the Planning Commission will need to set this over for another meeting. If you feel like you've said everything you can say tonight, then you can waive that 7 days. It still allows you to, the board hearing is brand new. So you're still on September 15th going to have a brand new chance to raise your issues. So that 7-day is more significant when it's your last hearing. In this case, you do have another opportunity. But having said that, if you want the 7 days, it's yours now. So you just need to let us know what your preference is.
No, so I just waive it.
You just wait. Okay.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Murphy.
thank you.
public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed. Are there any further questions of staff from the Planning Commission? Is there any discussion by the Planning Commission?
I have something I want to say. Although I am a proponent of personal property rights, and I think that Ms. Murphy has some valid issues here, I have not seen any argument addressing the non-consistent issues addressed by the staff and addressing the issues in the statewide planning goals. And that disappoints me.
Would you want me to go back and go through those, or did you want to just refer to staff's findings in the staff recommendation?
No, I believe the applicant had sufficient time to do that. Although they couldn't get online here, they do have the opportunity to provide that to the Board of County Commissioners. I think Ms. Murphy's property rights are not being addressed here adequately, but that's because we have our rules and regulations in place the way they are.
So I'll jump in, and I'm obviously very sympathetic to the situation that Mrs. Murphy and her husband are in. Unfortunately, I don't think that putting an urban zoning designation in the center of a bunch of ag and timberlands is the appropriate way to do that. I'm a little hopeful that perhaps there may be a way for her, I guess it's her grandson, to get a permit for an ADU on that property. Maybe that is a path forward, but the question before us right now is the zoning designation. And I think for a variety of reasons that we've heard, our hands are pretty tied, and that's just not an appropriate solution.
Anyone else? Commissioner Schroedel, you've been pretty quiet.
Just taking in the information. There's no advice I have at this situation.
Commissioner Pack?
I'll just note that in the Washington County area where I work, there have been multiple concept plans that were developed for a bigger area. I wouldn't say they're 12,000 acres, but up in the North Bethany area, Bull Mountain area, which now is referred to as River Terrace, South Cooper Mountain, North Cooper Mountain, Central Cooper Mountain. So the whole South Cooper Mountain area have been concept planned by enough mass of land base such that the property owners have an opportunity to plan out their long-term use possibilities for those areas. And there are opportunities for those properties to develop in a way that is systematic and allows for orderly development, in the area. Having said that, that requires tremendous amount of resources for the agencies that undertake the concept planning effort. And these are, the ones that I was involved in, they're millions of dollars in nothing but consult fees, let alone the staffing that's required by the county to be able to complete, counties and the cities, depending on which jurisdictions there were, to be able to complete these concept plans. I feel really bad for, the city of, what used to be city of Damascus, that don't have the ability to see this orderly planning process move forward. And I think in the future, there needs to be some discussion by the county on how to make that happen, because we can't bring these properties into UGB and just let the property owners piecemeal their way into full development and urban uses. And we talk about how we have, housing needs that needs to be met, and we have land that is supposed to be developed to meet those housing needs. So I know I just feel really bad for this property owner and the situation that she's in, and all the things that we've talked about tonight. And hopefully one of these days we can put this as a priority to complete a concept plan that's going to allow folks to move forward with developing their lands. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Peck. Commissioner Peterson.
Well, I was just going to echo what Carrie stated. I'm, this is a kind of reluctant, I agree with the planning staff, but it's really unfortunate because if there had this other action been done, we wouldn't be dealing with this issue perhaps. So I echo what Carrie was saying is, I'm gonna vote for the staff's recommendations, but with the caveat that the whatever it needs, whoever is responsible to get that concept plan going and done, there needs to be a fire lit here somewhere, because this is ridiculous to put this property owner in this silly predicament that she's in, just because we can't get a plan done. So.
I'll kind of just respond to that. I agree in concept with what you both are saying, but I also think that I actually think the zoning here is appropriate, and the zoning ordinance is doing what was intended to prevent this timberland from being subdivided multiple times, right? And it's actually fairly distant from other much more urban areas in the Damascus area. So I'm not convinced that the zoning is wrong or that it's a planning problem. I just think that the applicant is just in a terribly unfortunate circumstance, but just the zoning issue is not the reason for that per se.
I guess, but I would argue if you're gonna annex an area into the urban growth boundary, are you still gonna keep that as a timber reserve? I don't think so. So the fact that it's been annexed and intended to be part of the urban growth boundary, I don't care what it's zoned right now. The intention is not for that property to remain that type of use in the future. So that's why the whole thing seems really unfortunate and silly. They can't do anything.
And if I may add a comment, if you are to do concept plan for a wider area rather than lot by lot scenario, you can provide protection in certain areas and then create density in other areas. And that's the whole concept behind concept planning, is to meet the plan for identifying areas that should be protected versus areas that should be densified. And absent the concerted effort of looking at the big picture, it's really difficult for my property only to be the one that should be protected versus somebody else's property that can be developed. And I think that's what I was trying to convey, is that I'm a firm believer in property rights, and I'm also a firm believer in doing things in a systematic, big picture perspective. But you can't do that alone. And somebody has to step up, because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of resources. This isn't something that any one property owner can do. So I'm also going to agree with the staff recommendation, but I hope that someday we can get one of this, this to be a priority, and get the concept plan done so that property owners' destinies are a little bit more clear as they move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Pack. Commissioner Schroedel.
Thank you. I'm going to support staff's recommendation. when we get to that point, but I've been thinking and hearing, and I can't unhear what I've heard. And so what I've heard is through the public testimony of the applicant is that somebody did work on her property that didn't get a permit. And so when I hear somebody who's violated something else, I'm thinking I became aware of it in a public meeting, and that person, if they are bonded, should consider their bond be in jeopardy, and the landowner has a right to go after them for doing work on their property without permitting.
Yeah.
So
You're correct.
I don't know what the process is. I just know that if contractor does work on my land without a permit, yeah, it's my fault, but it's also the contractor's, especially if the contractor told me I don't need one. And I'll go back on mute because I'm not looking to create stuff. Jennifer's just smiling. If Jennifer's tail was like drinking water, she'd always be drinking water when I talk.
Commissioner Lopez, you've been pretty quiet.
But I do want to point out that two people just drank water.
You're muted still.
I totally agree with what Brian said. It's an unfortunate situation for this landowner, but we are here to adhere to the zoning that is currently in existence, and we can change zoning if it can be changed. And in this case, there's too many inconsistencies with the statewide planning goals, and I'm in support of the staff recommendation for denial. Again, it's an unfortunate situation, but we can't just have everyone who comes forward and they have a really good personal situation, for changing it. But, we're here to administer the statewide planning goals and the zoning comprehensive plan, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I'm going to vote.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I've been pretty quiet too through this, but yeah, I feel the same way as Commissioner Pasco, but I also feel the same as the rest of the commissioners that this particular area really has a lot of issues and hoops that you have to jump through. I'm amazed when I started reading into this, and this was a couple days ago. So I've been working on this particular meeting for a few days, digging up and going to all your references. There's quite a bit to dig through to come to the conclusions that you had come to. I'm impressed with what staff has done. And I too will also vote with what your recommendation. But boy, I love this commission. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Do I have a
Murph,
yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion here.
Okay.
I move to recommend approval of Z0167-21-CP and Z0168-21-ZAP, the Board of County Commissioners as recommended by staff with the following modification: that the Board of County Commissioners seriously consider the property rights of this applicant.
Can I jump in? I heard a motion to approve the application.
No, approve the recommendation of the staff.
That would be a recommended denial.
That's correct.
Okay.
With the modification that the Board of County Commissioners seriously consider the property rights of the applicant.
I don't
know if that's-
understand what that means. That's why I'm struggling.
Don't they consider it anyway? That's what they're gonna do.
I can't second that because I don't know what it means.
I still need to hear clearly.
Yeah,
It moved to recommend denial of files. Z0079-21-CP and Z0080 2021-21 ZAP to the Board of County Commissioners as recommended by staff.
That's correct, with the provision that they seriously consider the property rights of the individual.
Chair Murphy,
Yes.
Parliamentary Inquiry. We have a motion on the floor. It's waiting for a second. Any conversation should be around the motion. And if it doesn't get a second, then we deal with that.
Do I have a second? I don't have a second. Is there
Chair Murphy,
we want to have?
without a second, it just dies for lack of a second.
I guess perhaps we ought to approach this two ways. One is the action item before us, and perhaps maybe to get where Michael was going is maybe there's a recommendation that we send along with that maybe addresses some of our other concerns that are unrelated to the actual zoning application, but are issues that have come up that we would like to maybe reiterate to the county commission for, Michael's concerns about property rights being one, my concerns about the planning not being completed for that area being another, for example. That may be a better approach. And that way we can get the motion passed, and then we can debate how much of these other things we want to pass on to the county commission.
I think we're all struggling for a solution, right?
Yep.
And maybe Jennifer and the staff, maybe, it seems to be two questions of, it strikes me that the applicant from the public testimony isn't so much, they're just looking for a home, whether it's on this property, the adjacent property. And do we think that there might be some way around, some way to get them there? And I guess the second question is around, it would be helpful for us to understand if there's, what are the roadblocks right now to seeing some sort of more formal land use policy in this area, and what would that process look like, and how far away are we away from it, and what would I assume it's a budget and staffing issue mostly, right?
There's a lot of questions there.
Yeah.
So the easiest one is there a way to get a second dwelling on the adjacent piece that Miss Murphy's grandson, I believe it's grandson, lives on? And the answer is a temporary dwelling for care is the only option that I'm aware of that would work. Accessory dwelling units aren't allowed in the timber zone. A code amendment to allow that would open up, I think, a number of questions that we maybe don't want to take on right now. I'm not saying it's impossible because it is in the urban growth boundary. Maybe there's some flexibility there, but in terms of under current rules, would have to be a temporary dwelling for care, which would mean it would be a manufactured dwelling. But potentially, again, we'd have to look at setbacks and septic system and all of those things. But that's available under current zoning for her. And I would certainly encourage her to reach out to Melissa to have that conversation. As far as any other option for getting a dwelling either on this site or on the adjacent site, it would need a code amendment, short of a zone change, which I think clearly the reasons why staff feels that's not appropriate. It'd be a code amendment, and it would be threading an interesting needle about this not doing a code amendment that would run afoul of Metro's prohibition on increasing the density prior to a concept plan. And so I'm noodling around if there's anything we could do. Maybe there's some sort of targeted thing to the template or to the template dwelling criteria, but it still requires a code amendment. That has to be initiated by the board. It certainly wouldn't happen now. It would be something like next calendar year or something like that. So short of that, your larger question about concept planning, I think it's safe to say there are probably three different issues. One is, and it may be that the board, we have a different board than we did before, and it changes all the time. And so we don't always know where they're coming from on these things, but it had been the stated policy of the board that the county is not going to be the urban service provider for new urban areas. that function should be fulfilled by cities. And so in light of that, the county was not going to pursue any kind of concept planning. And the idea was if Damascus went away, which it did, then it was likely going to be Happy Valley. And until Happy Valley was ready, it was going to sit there. And it's clear that Happy Valley does have some interest, but it's going to be paced out. And I think, the other kind of practical point is that there are no urban services and there is no money to provide them. And there is no, I think there are technical challenges with providing sewer service to part of the area. That's my understanding. So we're talking about something that's pretty far out on the horizon. So while a concept plan might make everyone feel better, I don't think it's likely to result in near-term urban development the farther you get away from Happy Valley. I said there were three things. One was the city issue. The second one is money, like you mentioned. It's a lack of staff. We would need consultants flat out, period, to do something like that. So it's a grant or it's, extra general funds to pay for it. And the third thing is, frankly, the reality of trying to plan Damascus. It was really, really challenging. And I guess the question is whether that's likely to be any different if we were to go out and do it now. And I think that would probably be the first sort of question before we started talking about grants and consultants and more staff is there an appetite out there in the community to do this? Because there were such strong feelings on both sides, or the more than two sides, right? About whether we should urbanize or not urbanize, and property rights versus protecting the buttes, and on and on and on and on. And I think that would give us pause before taking on that kind of project.
I think that's right. That was my argument earlier, that I think if you ask 90% of the neighbors surrounding this property, they probably do not want to be annexed by Happy Valley. They don't want to see an increase in density, and they're happy with the current zoning standard. And it's unfortunate for this particular landowner, but I think there's, the reality is that is still pretty distant from the current urban areas in the county. So it's a challenging dilemma to be in.
Chair Murphy, I have two things. They kind of go together. One is for memorializing the minutes by chair calling the question to make sure that if we had a second or it died for lack of a second, because we do have an open motion that not aware that we have a conclusion on. So that's the first thing. So I call the question, is there a second to the motion?
What my motion was to accept the recommendation of the staff to deny the change in the zoning, but also to say that we believe in the personal property rights of individuals. And that should be a consideration by the Board of County Commissioners. Having these rules and regulations in place, some ways, in some cases, hurts individuals and their property. I understand that it's a need, but still, we need to take that in consideration.
We have a second. We do not.
Mr. Chair, I will move that we recommend to the county commission denial of these two case files as recommended by staff.
Second.
It has been
I'm sorry, who just seconded that?
Schradel.
Thank you.
It's been moved by Commissioner Pasco and second by Commissioner Schrodel that we move to recommend denial of file Z0079-21-CP and Z0080-21-ZAP to the Board of County Commissioners as recommended by staff.
Chair Murphy, for the discussion phase, I believe staff has heard from us that this has been challenging to have a situation like this before us, and that my request, my interest would be that the commissioners hear that this was such a difficult thing for us, and perhaps something needs to be done with Damascus. Something needs to be addressed for the entire thing. We either wait and tell them now and put a billboard up and say, you can request, but nothing's going to change. Or we take it on because it is part of Clackamas County and we address it and figure out what we're going to do. So I'm not saying my ideas, my interests will be met, but that is the discussion phase of this. I believe staff should make sure that the Board of Commissioners know that this is something we struggled with.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else?
I was going to second what Steve said, and but I'll wait till after we pass the motion for some other recommendations we might pass on to the commission.
Okay, so no further discussion?
I still believe we need to address personal property issues here. It's going to keep coming up. We have people out there that own property that are being denied rights to build on those properties by regulations and goals that are inconsistent now with the way we are living. Personal opinion.
Anyone else? If there's no further discussion, I'll call for a vote on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Unanimous. Motion passes. Public hearing is now closed.
Yeah, well, I think given the difficulty with this, I think some of us feel that there ought to be, that the commission needs to figure out a way to address Michael's concerns about property rights, personal property rights, versus and the conflict we have because of our zoning rules and all these overlays that make things that would on the surface seem like simple little things to accommodate, but we can't because of all the regulations. So if in fact, one of the ways of helping address that is to request that the commission consider making planning of the Damascus area a higher priority than it's been, recognizing it's going to be competing with all the other planning needs that we review every year. But in my mind, it's not unlike what happened with the Park Avenue. You know, light rail came in, the area should have been planned. Yes, it's not in an urban area, but you can't just ignore it because Milwaukee hasn't annexed it. So it seems like there ought to be some recognition that at some point the county's going to have to address this. They can't just say, well, we're going to wait for Happy Valley to annex it, or we're going to wait for somebody to annex it. Because now you have this people that are put in this position where they can't do anything because of this standoff. So I really think it's important for us to suggest that they give this more priority so that, you know, at some point there will be an easier way for people to deal with their property needs. So
The other perspective of that is that in this case, I think a large part of the community didn't want Metro in the middle of this in the first place, that people are fairly content with the current status, that we went many years with the city of Damascus trying to develop a land use plan out here and failed miserably on multiple attempts because the community couldn't get behind that. you know, and ask the county to take that on when there are no nearby, there's no nearby potential for urban development, right? We've got places that are technically in the urban growth boundary that are so far from any type of actual urban development resources that they're just not going to get developed anytime soon. And so I'm not so sure I disagree with the current county's policy of leaving it to the cities when they're able to expand into these areas. Why would the county take on that responsibility?
Well, we
Then
already
again,
have
Brian,
responsibility in-
Brian, why should we be trying to regulate these urban areas that are being incorporated into the urban growth boundary, which appears to be what's going to happen over the next 10, 15, 20 years without considering what they presently have and their property rights until we get the whole area developed into an urban area. They're out there trying to live and exist in a community that is not serviced by sewers and water services and things like that, yet we're requiring them to abide by those rules. That doesn't make sense to me until we develop that out there. Let them have some rights.
And they do have rights, and those rights are also protecting the neighboring property owners. And I think, you know, I think this area being developed in the next 20 years is extremely optimistic. It's very far from any urban resources right now.
And why limit the people?
I don't think this property is restricted in any way that other neighboring properties are. And I think if you asked a lot of the neighbors, they're quite happy with the current status. It just happened in this case that they sold off the parcel with the home.
Yeah.
Okay,
This is not a unique area within a urban growth
Right.
by any way, shape, or form in Oregon.
just for the sake of conversation here, I agree with you, Brian, that I'm sure there will be the same amount of resistance depending on what the plan comes up with,
Right.
and what the area is encountered. So it's not unlike the dilemma the county has with all these unincorporated areas that are perfectly content with the county providing all the urban services for them. They have no desire to be annexed. And this is another one of those unique situations. But at the same time, there ought to be some kind of an overall plan that we're working to. Recognize it could be 20, 30 years from now, maybe before some of these areas are affected. And that's kind of where I was getting at. I appreciate the dilemma.
Right.
Because I know exactly, I watched, from the sidelines, the challenges that Damascus had, and we knew when it disincorporated that we were going to be, county was going to be stuck with that, and eventually we were going to be dealing with it, and here we are. So I guess maybe I'll temper my opinion a bit. I think it needs to be put on the long-term planning list for the county, whether it gets done next year or 5 years. But right now, it's not even on the radar screen. And I think that's what I was trying to get at. It ought to at least be acknowledged. At some point, they're going to have to address this. And yes, it's going to be expensive, but you can't just keep kicking the can. You're eventually going to have to deal with it. And that's primarily what I was trying to say.
So this isn't an urban reserve, right? This is urban. This is within the urban growth boundary.
Yeah, that's why it's so unique.
Yes, it has a purpose as its zoning. within the urban growth boundary.
Right.
So I'm with Brian. I understand that you have to have these forested green belt areas to absorb your stormwater. We have a stormwater commissioner, Terry Pack, that could justify that we have to have places like this to absorb what we're putting out. And I think this is a very important area just for that green belt. Yes, maybe it will never be built on. Well, it will still be a very important part of the urban area as far as water quality, air quality, and just aesthetics to keep peace of mind, so to speak. I think we're very fortunate to have it.
But Murph, what do you see as urban reserve? Well, what do you see the regulations and rules and guidelines in that particular part? And knowing that it might be in an urban reserve for 30 or 40 years. And what are you going to do with those folks that want to move into that and develop their property or provide homes? How are you going to manage that in an urban reserve?
Well, I'm going to ask Martha on that. She's been very quiet. There has to be an inventory taken after every 5 years. Am I correct? Of industrial land?
Revision every 20
Yeah.
years, right?
Well, so Metro is ultimately responsible for maintaining and changing the urban growth boundary around the larger Portland metropolitan area. This property is already inside the urban growth boundary. Every 6 years, Metro has to do an analysis of expected growth and available lands and determine if the lands inside the urban growth boundary are sufficient. And so Damascus has been sort of a conundrum for them in that analysis for a little while also. I think that so unless I'm looking at the wrong property, this property is west of 222nd. It's in between Happy Valley and 222nd. And I think this is an area that Happy Valley is interested in urbanizing and planning for in the future, but I don't know what kind of time frame that would be. It is pretty far out. And though whatever plans Happy Valley has would be contemplated in that analysis of the urban growth boundary.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. Well, when they
Sort
do
of.
these inventories, they're looking not just specifically for an urban area. They're looking for ag areas. They're looking for green belts. They're looking for industrial, commercial zones. They're looking for all zones, right, to increase that urban growth boundary to keep that balance within it.
Yes, all of those are considered. They're first looking inside the urban growth boundary to see if there is sufficient land. And if there's not, then they start looking outside. But I can say, in as few words as possible, because it's getting late, I can say that largely because of what happened with Damascus, that this large area was brought in and it still, a lot of it has no urban plan. Because of that, Metro changed the rules about expanding the urban growth boundary, and areas that are brought in now do have to have some initial concept planning done prior to that. It doesn't help this particular area or this property, but it's definitely recognized as a problem that they're trying to fix for future, for the current and future urban growth boundary expansions. So this is a unique situation at this point in time, this whole area.
So it's fair to say that if this had not been included in the urban growth boundary now, it's likely that it would not be included in the near future because there's no plan for development out there.
I don't know if I would go that far for this particular property, because I do know that Happy Valley sort of has a longer term plan to go out to 222nd. It is conceivable that that area would have been considered, but I don't know for sure.
So would it be appropriate for property owners that are within Happy Valley's ultimate city annexation plan to talk to City of Happy Valley officials to have them get annexed quickly so that they can get concept planning done and do what they want with their property? Is that a route that's?
Well, it's certainly worth having a conversation with Happy Valley about. I don't think this particular property is close enough yet to the city limits to annex.
But there's a map that kind of divvies up all these different areas or not?
No, I'm just looking at a map that shows where Happy Valley city limits are right now. And I know that from conversations that we're having, working on an urban growth management agreement with them, I know where their sort of rough boundaries are, but I don't have any detailed mapping right now.
Okay.
Okay. Any more discussion?
So I can assure you that staff will convey what are a variety of sentiments on the commission, I think, that actually did a really good job of illustrating the challenges of Damascus, just in this little microcosm.
Right.
But they will get minutes and they will also, we will highlight what how difficult this was and the reasons why when we speak with them.
That works for me.
Nothing else? This public hearing is now closed. I think I closed it twice. But
Yeah, I think you did.
Really close now.
be closed. Both doors. Yeah, okay. Do we need to go over schedule?
So you have a hearing on phase 1 of the land use housing strategies project. So these are proposed code amendments that would implement what was previously discussed with you by Martha at the study session that you had. And that's happening August 23rd. And then that's all that's on the calendar right now. So assuming that you do not, oh, Martha, there's something else.
Sorry, I was waving at Melissa.
Oh,
She said she was leaving.
I'm going to take
Bye,
off.
Melissa.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Great job.
No, that's okay. So I thought, what did I forget? So other than that, there's nothing currently scheduled. So unless 2 weeks from tonight, you want to continue the housing hearing, because the board is not having their hearing on that until October. So if you, for some reason, you didn't get through it in 2 weeks, you could set it over to September. But assuming that you get through it in 2 weeks, there you will have no meetings in September. So you'll know in 2 weeks whether there are any meetings in September. And I don't know, there is another, it's actually just a comp plan amendment, kind of an unusual one with a goal exception that's in, but don't think we've really determined yet exactly whether it's complete and whether it's actually proceeding, what the date would be, but it certainly wouldn't be before October. So that's all we have at the moment.
Let me ask you this, Jennifer. Is the Board of County Commissioners having a public hearing on what we talked about tonight as a in-person event?
Yes, it's hybrid. Their meetings now are hybrid. So the board members are typically in person, staff is in person. I mean, board members can participate via Zoom, but mostly they're in person now, I think maybe always. And then staff's there in person. But for the public applicants, it's their option. They can come in or they can testify via Zoom. And the board's hearing room is all set up for that to allow it to be hybrid.
Thank you.
I guess that's it. That's all, folks.
See you in a couple weeks, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Thank you.
See you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks,
Once,
everybody.
once again, Murph, you did a good job.
Hey, it's all of us. This is an awesome commission. I love it. We have great discussion.
Thanks, Murph.
Good night,
Yeah,
everybody.
thanks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.